Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I can stay. I've foreseen to stay until the end, so it shouldn't be a problem for me to stay for the discussion. So
São dois. Este é. Qual é? Sim. Ok. Podem ser duas. Okay.
I'm sure.
Yeah, we can see it very well.
Okay, good.
Luís, está tudo? Temos as redes prontas para entrar no ar? So we are opening the social media to start transmitting, and then we start. First of all, in name of Tafiza, but Jean-François is here, he's the new Secretary General. Thank you for your attention and for your kindness to be present and to participate in this final conference, of course, and it's a pleasure to have you here, as always.
Thank you, Paulo, and thank you also for the invitation. I must say, it was a bit challenging, but nevertheless,
I know. We know.
I'm happy to be. Well, I'm not happy to be here. I would like to be with you there in Lisbon, but okay.
Can you imagine?
It was asked, and unfortunately, I couldn't be there. So, but nevertheless, happy to be with you. And when you asked me to talk about the challenges with Sport for One,
we didn't start yet.
Oh no! Okay.
Was only just to thank you. Okay.
Yeah, well.
My technicians, Wonder Team, can we start or not? I will make 1 minute introduction and then I will give you the floor, okay, Michael?
Yep, good.
Okay, so good afternoon to all. We're gonna have this 1 hour and a half opportunity to discuss opportunities and challenges for sports for all in Europe. This is a particular relevant topic after the morning where we had the opportunity to present part of the work that we have developed in the Europe in Action project. And because it's particularly challenging because of, as you know, the war situation that we have in Europe with the consequences in both economic and social dimension. And of course, this implies adjustments in the sports for all tissue and also in the policies all over Europe and also at the national, local level. Fortunately, we have the opportunity to have with us two specialists. They are both in Brussels at the moment. They could not join us in Lisbon, unfortunately. But we have opportunity to listen to impulse speeches and interventions, one from Michael Cyrnos from Policy Office at the European Commission, and the other one from Arthur Legal from the Share Initiative group. And of course, this will be for sure food for talk and food for thought, because a lot of input from the latest time will be shared with us today. So with no further delays, we will start with Michael. Michael, please, the floor is yours, and thank you for your time and to be the opportunity to be with us. Thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Paulo. And as I've said already to you bilaterally, I would have loved to be with you in Lisbon, but unfortunately it was not possible. Nevertheless, I hope that my contribution might be useful and that it could be helping you also in the discussion and in the challenges that you mentioned. You showed me, so I realize now that I'm full screen and with a big head on the screen, so I have to be careful also in terms of my facial expressions, so I'll be very careful on that. Nevertheless, when you asked me to bring something on the challenges for Sport for All in Europe, my first reaction was, Sport for All is not really my thing. And then I started thinking, and then I realized that I've been in sports for 40 years, I've been studying sport, I've been working in sport. And then at that point, I realized that I was in Sport for All since the very start and since the very beginning. And I think that, to be honest, even before starting my presentation, is already one of the challenges for the Sport for All community in Europe. It is people like myself who have been in sport were not always realizing that we were into Sport for All. So I've started at a very young age with sport at the age of 6, 7 years old, and with that I probably will give you my age, but it was almost at the same time as the Council for Europe launched the Sport for All concept in 75, 76. And I think I'm one of the products of that Sport for All campaign, because in Belgium and Finland, it was something that has been picked up very quickly. And I still remember the first times that I've touched the basketball and I started playing basketball. It was through a Sport for All campaign where a sports club came to my school and gave initiations in basketball. And that's where the microbe got me. So thinking of it, I started realizing that it was a product of the Sport for All movement without even realizing it. But okay, that being said, and I think as an introduction that can count for a challenge, but what I propose to do is, as you know, we've just recently published the new Eurobarometer. Eurobarometer gives us quite some elements that, in my view, link to the Sport for All movement. And I will go through a number of those in some 20 slides. And at the end, I will also give you a few slides on the funding possibilities. I know that the majority of you, of course, are fully aware of it, but I think for the people who are following online also, it's always good to repeat what the European Commission is also bringing into place in support of Sport for All in Europe. Well, let me see. There we go. First thing I'd like to show is a bit the Eurobarometer methodology. I will not go into the technical elements of it, but I think it's important to mention this before I go to the next slides. You need to know that it's something that has been done in the 27 EU member states, and I know that Tafiza works beyond the 27 EU member states. But I'm telling you that because what I will tell you in the next slides needs to be put in the context of the 27 EU member states. So when I'm talking about that, keep in mind that that's the 27 EU member states. The field work on the Eurobarometer took place between halfway April and halfway May. Why am I saying this and emphasizing this? For two reasons. One, it was outside the pandemic. So it was already at a moment where people were able to do sports again and where everything or almost everything was again open. So people didn't have the excuse or were not biased by the context of the pandemic. That's one. And two, the previous Eurobarometers usually took place November, December. So the one of 2009, the one of 2013, 2017, it was always at the end of the year. So keep that also in mind when I come up with some elements. But nevertheless, it stays quite comparable in terms of the different Eurobarometers. It was face-to-face, very important. That's also why we waited so long to do the next barometer, because we really wanted to have it face-to-face. The majority was face-to-face. There was some computer assistance, but the majority was face-to-face. Total number of a little bit more than 26,000 respondents overall from all over Europe. Very important, the population is plus 15. That is important to take into account because much of what you do with Sport for All is also focusing, of course, on the minus 15 and how can we get the youngsters up into sport. So that is important to mention also. And then, I mean, the final point is on the weighing that has been used where it's in accordance with the size of the population of each country. So in terms of representativeness, you can really be relatively sure that we do have some good indications on what is living among the Europeans. So in that sense, that is important. Good. First and foremost, almost half of Europeans never exercise or play sport. So we have 45% who says never to do exercise or play sport. It's stabilizing compared to 2017. But compared to 2009, it's plus 6%. So what we see here that despite all the work that have been done over a decade and more than a decade, we see that the number of people who never do sport or do not exercise remains relatively stable. So I think that is already a huge challenge now for the Sport for All community. I mean, we realize and we see that despite everything that we do, there is still a huge number of people who are not active. I'm a more optimist person. I would say the glass is half full, but nevertheless, we need to be realistic and we need to accept that this is quite a challenge. For your information, at the bottom of the slide, you will see that here, for example, we're talking about all respondents. So this is the reply that came from all the respondents. You will see further on in the presentation that the base sometimes changes. What we've seen and what we've learned from them, from the people who are active. So look again, base, these are the people who do practice sport or are active, physically active. The majority of them want to do this in outdoors settings or at home or on the way between home and school, work or shops. Probably, I'm always very cautious with that. This is probably related to the fact that we came out of the pandemic and a lot of people have changed their habits and found also the joy of being outdoors active or being at home active because of the necessity. So this is, I think, also something to take on board for the Sport for All community, especially also the numbers underneath, when we see that people are less active in a sport club, are less active at sports centers, at schools or universities, given the fact that usually or very often the Sport for All is taking place in a setting within a club or within sports centers. I think this is definitely something to take on board and to be seen also as a challenge, I think, for the Sport for All community. As I've said, this is definitely, in my view, a challenge for the Sport for All, because only 3 in 10 respondents are members of a sport club, and we see that it goes down even. So you see that almost 70% of the respondents aren't a member of any club whatsoever. A lot of promotion for physical activity and sport takes place within the setting of a club. So this is definitely also an important element to take on board, I think, because this shows that, and it's something that you see overall in Europe, that the club membership goes down. And of course, COVID has had an impact on this, but nevertheless, this is something that is quite stable compared to 2017. So you can see it also in the numbers. This isn't going up, but this isn't going down. So I think it is something we need to continue to put the emphasis on, that setting of sport clubs does remain important for Sport for All, but that nevertheless that many of them are not active. Keep in mind, this is again all respondents, and important also, and I did not mention that at the start, but I think it's important to realize, I'm talking about EU averages. If you will look into the details of the Eurobarometer and make the comparison between the different member states, you will see huge differences. So, and I'm mentioning this because I think that is also one of the challenges that Sport for All movement is confronted with. There is no one fit all, how would I say, one fit all solution. You will have to have really tailored solutions for each member state, and sometimes even for each region, and sometimes even for each city and local situation. I was in The Hague a few weeks ago, and we visited a number of neighborhoods, and even within cities, you see that in between different neighborhoods, you have huge differences. So I believe that is definitely a huge challenge in relation also to these members of a sport club. Most important reasons why people continue to be active in sports and physical activity is to improve their health. That is the main challenge. You will see that if you look a little bit more in detail into these statistics, improving fitness goes down, having fun goes down, and we see that, for example, controlling weight, improving physical appearance. So all these things related to health are really main reasons why people are active and are into sports and physical activity. Keep in mind, once again, look at the base. These are the ones who are active and who are into physical activity. So I believe that this is important because this is what people say why they are doing sports. So I believe that this, in terms of raising the awareness and the importance of sport and physical activity, you need to take that on board, I think. And that, of course, might be a challenge if you very often work with sport clubs whose main core business is about offering sport. People do these things because they are worried about their health. So to some extent, when we make promotion, when we are promoting it, raising the awareness, we will have to incorporate these elements of the fact that they are doing it mainly because of health issues. And then, of course, relaxation, fun, especially fun, for example, we see that is dropping a little bit. So definitely also to take into account this. Main barrier is lack of time. And that is, even compared to 2017, it has even increased. Lack of time remains the main barrier, and is definitely a challenge if you want to promote sport for all, because you will have to come up with solutions how you can counter this main barrier for people with not being physically active. You will have to come with proposals of, for example, when the children are having sport, that, for example, for the adults, there's at the same time something that you offer so that people can be active. Because keep in mind, these are results of plus 15. So these are not children. This is like plus 15 that has replied to this. So very important. Second reason is lack of motivation or no interest. 1 out of 4 says that that's the reason why they're not active. So we have to come up with motivating and really interesting programs, and we need to come up with maybe not the usual recipes, but maybe we'll have to be thinking about more innovative recipes and see, okay, how can we motivate people? Keep in mind also, and that's also an important one, I think, the fourth reason, that it's too expensive. 1 in 10 say that being physically active and doing sport is too expensive. It's also something that we see, I haven't got it in the presentation, but it's also something that we see if we compare the people who are active and aren't active, and we look at their social status. There very often we see that people who have higher education are more active, people with lower education are lesser active. So this is definitely related also to the expensiveness of being sportive and physically active. So also surely a challenge, I think, for everything related to sport for all. What I think is really nice and good to see is the fact that most of the Europeans, I think 76% of them, they do agree that in the area where they live, that there are many opportunities to be physically active. And that's, I think that's quite encouraging, because that means that in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the possibilities that are available, Europeans are very positive about this. So I believe that that is not as such a challenge, that is more of the sort of realization that what we've been doing in the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we came up with some good results. So people are quite happy with what is presently available for them. Most of them are also very pleased with what local sport clubs provides, and sports providers bring at the local level. So there also, I think that once again, local sport clubs have done a very good job in offering sports and physical activity over the last couple of decades. People tend to agree that what is being offered is really very good, and it's helping them also to be physically active. On the other hand, almost half of the Europeans believe that their local authority does not do enough in relation to physical activities. So that is, in my view, also a serious challenge for sport for all, because apparently when we ask Europeans what they think, they say that the clubs are doing a good job, the opportunities are available, but apparently the local authorities, to some extent, are lagging behind. Somewhere there is a gap there, and that's definitely something that needs to be looked into in detail, because what exactly, of course, these are the results of a question: to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statements about sport and physical activity? Your local authority does not do enough for its citizens in relation to physical activities. What's behind these replies? That's always difficult, of course, and there will be huge differences also between the different member states. But nevertheless, I think that is surely also one of the challenges. This is, for me, one of the most worrying results of the Eurobarometer. Especially in the context of sport for all. Only 1 in 10 are engaging voluntarily or planning to engage voluntarily in the sports sector. Knowing that in Europe, our sports sector and physical activity sector depends hugely on voluntary work, if I see this, then I am a bit worried. So I think that this is one of the main challenges, namely the appreciation of volunteers and seeing how we can counter this, because we will not be able to continue to count too much on volunteers. For me, that is really a very worrying outcome. Going towards more or less the end, we had also a few questions about the environment, and we had a few questions also about gender equality. So these are like the 2 last topics I'll touch upon in terms of challenges. Slightly more than half of Europeans pay little attention to the impact that practice of sport or physical activity can have on the environment. I think in the given situation and in the current situation that we also have to be very careful about this, because what we see is that in the long term, climate change and environmental impact could have an impact also on the opportunities and the possibilities that are available for people to be sportive and physically active. If the ones who are, because look at the base, these are the people who are physically active, who are engaged in sport, if they do not pay attention already, half of them don't pay attention to the potential impact their activities can have on the environment, this might be worrying, because we need to raise the awareness also of the potential impact of their physical activity and sportive actions on the environment. So directly, one could say we don't care, but we should be caring about this, because this might have on the long-term impact also on the possibilities of being physically active. So I think that this is also something we need to pay attention to, especially in the context of sport for all, I think. There we go. The ones who are active, who are a member of a club, half of them have no idea if their clubs are involved in sustainability or in actions in support of the environment. So here again, a sort of confirmation of the previous slide. Even the people who are actively involved in a club, even they are not fully aware of the fact that their clubs are doing something for the environment. So here again, another element that indicates that people need to be made aware of the fact that also their activities in sport and physical activity can have an impact, and that the local clubs can also do something about it. We've recently, within the SHARE initiative, published a guidance document for local clubs on how they can step into that green transition within the context of the Green Deal. And local clubs do have an important role also in raising the awareness, because this climate change and the environmental impact is something that goes even beyond, of course, our sports sector and our sports stakeholders' work, but it will have a direct impact of the future of our sector and the future of sport for all. So definitely an important element to take on board, and in my view also one of the major challenges that needs to be addressed. We asked, as I've said, something about gender equality, and there we see that the majority of Europeans, once again, who are a member of a club, they indicated that their clubs are actively putting measures in place that support gender equality. So I think that is already quite positive. It's good that we already see that people involved in clubs are noticing that there is something on gender equality done in the clubs. And especially if we're talking about sport for all, we need to, of course, pay attention to this, because we do see that in the statistics, if we compare male participation and female participation, there is still quite a gap in between both of them. So we have still some work to do on gender equality. So I think that in the context of sport for all, this is also quite important. Almost 8 in 10, I think it's like 78% do agree that female role models are important, because they do inspire women and girls to be sportive and to be physically active. So that is really important, that we continue to invest on having role models, female role models, not only within athletes, but also among managers, among officials, among coaches. They play a very important role. And within the context of sport for all, I believe that is definitely also something that needs to be taken on board. Of course, it is already taken on board, but we have to continue to invest in this, because this is quite important. And then my final slide on this topic is this one. Despite what we've seen in the previous two slides, and we know all that media plays a very important role, if we then ask people, and then we're talking about all respondents, look at the baseline, there we see that less than 6 in 10 agree that they will also follow female sport as they do for male sport. So on the one hand, people tend to say we need female role models, but on the other hand, when we then ask, will you be able or will you be willing to follow female sport in the media, then they're much more reluctant to do so. So there, I think, in terms of sport for all and having a good basis for the sport for all movements, we need those female role models. But on the media, we still have to some extent, try to see how we can make sure that female sport comes more into the media and that it's being appreciated also by the audience more than it is apparently right now. So I think this is definitely also an important challenge. Good. As I've said, this is final slide on the elements on the Eurobarometer and number of challenges I think that are interesting to talk about. And I've seen that Paul has taken quite some notes, so I think he has some material to talk about challenges. Let me quickly mention what we from the European Commission bring on board to help, of course, with these challenges. You're all familiar with Erasmus Plus sport. I mean, that's the reason why you're all there today and why you are following online, because of the existence of Erasmus Plus sport. This year, we had a little bit under 71 million euros available for Erasmus Plus, and it will continue to rise until 2027. So we have an overall budget of 500 million, give or take, for the 7-year period of 21-27. I'm mentioning this because the Sport Info Day at the end of January of next year is always a very important moment also for the Sport for All community to come to Brussels and to meet and network with other potential partners. This is and remains a very important event where you can team up and meet up with people with whom you can prepare projects in support also of the Sport for All concept and the Sport for All idea. So that's why I think maybe the numbers are maybe not that important, but the aspect of the Sport Info Day and coming to Brussels and network with people is quite important and really crucial. A second element I want to bring to your attention, I'm sure that you all have heard of it, but nevertheless, I want to really draw your attention to this. As of next year, there's now also the learning mobility of sports staff. I think that within the context of Sport for All, this is a very important and interesting evolution. It is about supporting the learning mobility of sports staff in grassroots sport, but also staff in non-grassroots sport. So, but then the condition is that their participation to the mobility should benefit the grassroots sport. So I think this is quite important, and you see that in this definition you have sports staff on the one hand and grassroots sports on the other hand. When we talk about sports staff, we've kept it as broad as possible to give as much opportunities as possible for people to participate in this. We mean persons that are involved in both the instruction, but also training and also management of both or a sport team or also individual sports people. So we've really kept it as broad as possible. And it can be people who are involved in these things either on a paid basis or on a voluntary basis. So it is a quite large set of people who are eligible to step into this learning mobility, but we think that it's important to offer as much opportunities as possible in this context. And then grassroots sport, very important also. There we're talking about physical leisure activities that are practiced on a regular basis. That's important at a non-professional level, also quite important. And then also of all ages, for health, educational or social purposes. And that last part is, of course, in the context of Sport for All, quite important. We are really working on grassroots sports over the full width of ages and purposes that people are active. And then I think this is my last slide. So I just wanted to mention also these two. It's a short day. The closure of these projects is the 26th of October. So if you would be interested, I'm afraid that it will be very difficult to still come up with a proposal. But nevertheless, I'm giving you this because it's also a demonstration of what we are also contributing in the context of environmental and climate impact. Remember what I've mentioned earlier in terms of challenges. There is a a pilot project called Grassroots Sport Programs and Infrastructure Innovation. I'm mentioning it because we are realizing that in terms of infrastructure, and certainly with the energy crisis that we are confronted with, this will be one of the major challenges also in the coming months and in the coming years, because we know that the sports infrastructure in general in Europe is quite old and is in need of quite some renovation. So there is this pilot project, but besides that, there's also other funds that are available, but outside of the sport context, but which could also help in the renovation of these sports infrastructure. But this is going to be also one of the major challenges in the coming time. And then the second is a preparatory action, which is about sport for people and planet. And there, once again, we're talking about a new approach on sustainability through sport. What I mentioned earlier, the sports sector can and will have to contribute also to the green transition. So, and I believe that they can play a very important role also in that context. And with that note, I came to the end. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I've been able to give you some, as we say in Dutch, voorzetten. So I've thrown the ball in front of the goal, and I hope that you will be able to head it in, kick it in. Well, I mean, now I'm using football references, so I should say I'm giving you an assist, and you take the ball and you now dunk it in the basketball rim. So I hope that we can have a good discussion on these challenges. And please do not hesitate to contact me or follow us online. I hope that we can have a very good discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. As you know, I was also a basketball coach and a basketball player, so I accept the challenge, and we have promised to play some basketball somewhere, maybe in Lisbon, in Brussels, we'll see. But as I counted in my full sheet of notes, I count mainly 16 challenges that you showed us. So I probably will not have time to address all the challenges here today, but as I write it well, it were 16 challenges in a different type of perspectives: infrastructures, funding, participation, determinants of participation, determinants of dropout. We have reached a lot of points, and for sure, one thing we understand that is the sports sector now is facing, along with the different stakeholders at different level, is facing a huge challenge, not only in a social dimension, but also in an economical and cultural dimension. And for sure, we will be having a good discussion on this. And now, Arthur, I think you are also ready to start your presentation. So Arthur is working and coordinating, along with Michael, the work done by the group of the Share Initiative. So Arthur is let's say one of the biggest important person there coordinating along with Michael. So please, the floor is yours, and we hope that you can share the presentation. Can you do it, Arthur, please? Yes.
How is it working? You can see it? Perfect.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks a lot, Paolo, for inviting me, and very much looking forward to discussing with all of you this important topic. And it's a pleasure as well to as Michael said as well, to be with the Sport for All movement. And same as Michael, I don't necessarily consider myself a member of it, but then if I look back at my whenever I've been doing sport, there was always a connection with the Sport for All movement. So my name is Arthur Legal. I'm director at KA, which is a research center and consultancy based in Brussels and specialized in culture and sport. We do many things: research, strategic advice, and projects on culture and sport. And one of the important things I'm doing is to coordinate, along with Michael at the Commission, the Share Initiative, which is around, let's say, unlocking the potential of sport and physical activity for local and regional development, and especially through cohesion policy funds. I'll explain all that in a minute. But I don't have so much on challenges, but for Sport for All, I think you've covered many of them, but I still listed some of them here. I focused really on the challenges linked to, let's say, accessing funding and, let's say, the ability to sort of structure yourself, your organization, your partnerships around access to funding, and especially here today, EU funding. First, we are talking about a key challenge, which is the diversity and the size and scale of the structures working on Sport for All. We're often talking about small structures, which are faced with the issue of decrease in volunteering as well. So you need to do more yourself as well. So there is a bit a sort of time and resources constraints in order to develop the scale which is necessary to access funding and EU funding. There is also a bit of a lesser backing from organized federations. And here, of course, Tafiza is a notable exception, but in the Sport for All movements, we don't have necessarily the whole pyramid structure that we know well for the most organized sport. So there is also this challenge of, let's say, not necessarily having the, let's say, bigger fish in the pond who can support you in accessing funding and perhaps doing some sort of bigger projects that might involve smaller structures. And the third point is, well, the people who are here in this room and following online might not be concerned by this, but overall there is still lack of knowledge, awareness of all the funding opportunities. It really depends from one organization to another, but there's certainly a bit of awareness raising to do on this front. However, there is also a lot of unique strengths of Sport for All organizations. The first one is probably the most important one, is that when looking at funding options, they're often linked to public policy objectives. And Sport for All organizations are highly relevant for them. And that's already a key strength. You don't have to sort of stretch your activities to, let's say, develop inclusive programming because you're already doing that by nature, for instance. So there is often a very high relevance in terms of connecting with public policy objectives. Sport for All organizations are also quite closely connected to their local fabric, let's say. They are often locally rooted or community rooted. There is strong engagement, let's say, with citizens, at least perhaps stronger than some other types of sport organizations. And all of that gives some sort of unique partnership opportunities. So you can do more than, let's say, you might think you can do. And by developing partnerships is probably also the way to overcome fragmentation and the smallness of organizations. That's just a sort of preliminary appraisal, and of course that strongly differs from one organization to another. But it's a bit the sort of canvas I will use to navigate the different opportunities that I will discuss. Now, this slide is not really beautiful, but I wanted to give this a bit of perspectives. You all know Erasmus Plus. Well, most of you know Erasmus Plus Sport. Michael brilliantly presented it. I will briefly talk about this as well, but very lightly. But when you look at the sort of panorama, and it's not exhaustive, of EU funding options, I always work with, let's say, the main programs. So Erasmus Plus, COSME, or now the single market programs, Horizon, which is more for entrepreneurship, Horizon Europe, which is more for research and development, and then looking more at ERDF, Interreg, backed, so all these sort of territorial cooperation projects, which are all, let's say, all have the different entry points. Some of them are for cities, some of them are for regions, but all of them have in common the fact that they want to work on, let's say, the development, economic and social development of cities and regions across Europe. I'm not necessarily going to deep dive into each program because that would be a long discussion and not necessarily that useful for organizations. But what I want to draw your attention towards is rather the sort of accessibility column. And of course, it's very subjective here. It's just my own appraisal of how accessible these programs are in general terms, but also most specifically for Sport for All organizations. And of course, Erasmus Plus Sport is the one which is dedicated to you, and it's by far the most accessible. But at the end of the day, if you look at, let's say, ERDF, Interreg, URBAC, so all this sort of array of programs looking at local and regional development, since Sport for All organizations are so relevant to public policy objectives, there is a sort of pathway for accessibility to these funding lines that can be explored. So this is on Erasmus Plus. I'll sort of skip this quickly because that was already explained by Michael. So no need to repeat that. It's something similar to what Michael was discussing. The only thing I would flag is that compared to other EU funding programs, there is a great deal of efforts which is put into making this program as accessible as possible, and especially the small collaborative partnerships are a very good first step, let's say, in EU funding in Erasmus Plus sport. So this is quite a unique model in terms of very accessible, relatively low threshold types of EU funding programs, calls for proposals, sorry. Also has quite a good hit rate compared to other programs. So that's definitely a good stepping stone to sort of organize your cooperation, start sharing ideas, good practices, sharing issues as well, develop common solutions. So it's really the sort of a very good starting point for smaller organizations here. But of course, when you look at the bigger picture, and that's part of the work we are developing in the SHARE initiative, what we see is that if we'll navigate a bit the landscape of EU funding, Erasmus Plus is just a small bubble amongst all the other funding possibilities. It's the most accessible one, but of course, if you want to scale up your projects and develop something which is taking place at a bigger scale, you probably need to look somewhere else. And I mentioned Horizon Europe, which is not easily accessible, but it's definitely a larger, say, funding basket where you can develop your own projects, of course, focusing more on research innovation, perhaps on health, because there is a cluster focusing on health as part of Horizon Europe. So, but there is, let's say, there are alternative ways. And another very important basket of funding would be the whole cohesion policy funds, and especially the European Regional Development Fund that I've already briefly mentioned. This is by far the, let's say, largest EU funding opportunity. It is working in a different way as well, which we'll explain in a minute. But that is definitely also something that is worth considering for Sport for All organizations. Again, because of the specificity that you're well connected with public policy areas, which is exactly what I'm going to talk about right now. If you consider sport and physical activity as a sector, it's quite sort of restricted sector. We agree it's important, we agree it matters, but still, as a sector, it's still fairly small. However, if you consider the positive contribution of sport and physical activity, then sport becomes a sort of agent, driver of local, regional development. For example, if you look at, for example, the added value of sport and physical activity in terms of engaging with marginalized groups, then sport can definitely make a very strong impact, positive impact in terms of social cohesion. And similarly, if you look at active mobility, then there is a direct connection between sport, physical activity, and sustainable and green infrastructures. So sport, and in particular Sport for All, really connects to a broad array of policy areas. And all of these policy areas are also connected to the priorities of this big basket of money, which are cohesion policy funds. And it's here in the outermost layer of this graph. So Europe closer to citizens, greener, low carbon Europe, more connected Europe, smarter Europe, more social Europe. All of that is part of cohesion policy objectives. Now, how do we connect between Sport for All movement and these big policy objectives that I mentioned? That is something we have been working on as part of the SHARE initiative. And the answer we have developed is what we call the active development approach. I'm going to skip quite quickly on these slides because we don't need to go into the details. We've done webinars also on the active development approach, and we've got lots of resources available for you to sort of deep dive into the topic. But I just want to explain to you very briefly how that works, why we need it, and how we can apply it. First, cohesion funds are not necessarily easily understood by organizations, be it sport organizations or any of them. So there is a need for support, there is a need for a more coherent approach and a bit more partnership and vision-driven approach to make sure that even smaller organizations can make the right contribution to local and regional developments through cohesion funds. Cohesion funds are managed by what we call managing authorities at regional and national levels sometimes. The management dependent on the country-to-country basis. We can help you to find the right, let's say, door to knock at. But in any case, this is something that needs to be done at locally or nationally at best. But what we argue is that a more concerted approach is needed in order to tap into the potential of cohesion funds. And when it comes to active development, what we say is that health and well-being, and therefore physical activity and sport, are a central objective of economic and social development. And sport and physical activity are instrumental in delivering on these objectives. But not only that, sport and physical activity is also about delivering economic and social development. It's also about, let's say, improving it's also about improving social cohesion, as I mentioned earlier, but it can only do so if we move from isolated projects to a bit of a more concerted approach, to a more linked strategy, to a more progressive approach. The way to do that is, we've got 10 steps to do that, and the whole 10 steps are designed to move from a sort of own organization perspective to a shared vision, to a shared partnership-driven approach, and to really take your idea to the right place and the right, let's say, funding opportunity with the right consortium, the right approach, the right partnerships, the right public policy objectives. So we've got 10 steps which are around developing a shared vision, assessing your strengths and weaknesses, identify the initiatives which are already ongoing and develop your project on this basis, but also understanding the different instruments, mapping the resources available, and then get support, develop the partnerships. That is really the crucial steps, especially for smaller organizations, which will not be able to deliver on a, let's say, larger public policy objectives such as social cohesion. You can make your own contribution on that, but in order to really do it properly, you need to do that in partnership, for example, with your city, for example, with your Olympic committee, for example, with that large social association which is working with you on some projects. Then the last 10 step 7 to 10 is around developing a project. That is something that you are probably familiar with if you've ever developed an Erasmus Plus project. The logic is similar to that here. It's just that you need to do that again in partnership and with the right, let's say, level of intervention. So the tips here are designed for support for all organizations that want to develop projects under the cohesion funds, so this big basket of money. But this largely applies as well to any other, let's say, project that you want to develop and that goes beyond the remit of a simple sports project. And I'm saying simple in a good, not in a bad way, just simple in the sense that it remains within the remit of a sport organization in its mission. Whereas what I'm saying here is if you want to go beyond that and let's say leave a footprint on, let's say, the public spaces or leave a footprint in, let's say, social cohesion programs. So how to do that? You define your project based on these broader policy objectives that I mentioned earlier. You find the right entry points where you feel you're relevant to address the bigger challenges, the wicked issue in society or in the economy that you can have an impact on. You think about intermediaries, you think about the actors in your ecosystems. So it might be sport incubators, it might be sport clusters, it might be big associations working with you in social inclusion programs. So think of the intermediary that would be the vessel to enable you to develop a bigger project and within a partnership model, but without having you to do all the work and take up all the, let's say, financial and human resources challenges that it involves. Then develop long-term partnerships that goes hand in hand. You need to develop the right level of trust. You need to have the project partners that will help you to deliver on broad strategic objectives. And then the rest is, well, the last point is more for local and regional authority, but the fourth point is around identifying the right contacts, the resources to inform yourself on ERDF funding, European Regional Development Funding. This is managed at regional level or national level. There are contact points. There is a list available. If you're struggling to find it, you can reach out to me and I'll find it for you. It's once you know where it is, it's easy to find. But if you don't know, it can be a challenge. So don't hesitate to, let's say, get support wherever it is available as well. And the Share Initiative is partly here for that. And at this stage, that's all I wanted to say. I think I skipped a few parts on Erasmus Plus because that was already covered. But I think those are the key messages I wanted to share with you today. We'll be very happy to take on board any question you may have. I would be very happy also to share experiences with you, to give any further tips, tricks to navigate your way around funding opportunities. Many thanks and looking forward to the discussion.
Arthur, thank you. Excellent presentation also. So before we start the discussion, so I will ask to join me at the stage Mrs. Jacqueline Kronenberg from the Netherlands, Dennis Karakassis, hope I spell it well, from Poland, Eva Markovic, from Tafiza, Jean-François Laurent, and from Cyprus, Nicolas Dimitriou. So this is a mix between top-level organization and national representatives of organizations in the different countries with different realities. And I also count more than 10 challenges that Arthur provide us today. So altogether, just in these two small presentations, we have 26 challenges to address, which is, I think, will be impossible in our conversation. But I will start first with ladies. We're going to make a round table, and then we come again to Michael and Arthur to help us on this conversation. So we will start. We have four main issues on this conversation. We have policy, we have cooperation, we have monitoring, how things will be implemented, and to measure and to adjust, and then we have funding. So part of their intervention, both Michael and Arthur spoke about funding, which normally is one of the most, let's say, exciting topics in the conversation. But I think it is important to start with the background that both Michael and Arthur just give us in a different perspective. First of all, it's the question about the lessons learned from, or the first lessons learned with the three Eurobarometer, last three Eurobarometer surveys, 2014, 2017, and now 2021, which was published recently. And like Michael was saying, there is a trend in a European perspective that the numbers are not getting up and that we are facing certain type of problems. So the first question to you, Jacqueline, and then I will pass to all the colleagues, is how do you see these in particular in the European movement and in national movement in the Netherlands, these numbers that were just published, and what are you doing in terms of policy at national level and more local level to address these issues? Jacqueline.
Okay, thank you for this question. Does the microphone work? Yes? Okay.
Can you hear the microphone?
Yeah?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there's so much going on, and when you look at the Eurobarometer, I don't know where to start or to finish, but a few things that I remember from the statistics that for me, or also some remarks in my head when I heard, for instance, Michael talk about the Eurobarometer. We can say that even with all the work that we have done, we have not succeeded in getting more people physically active. You could also ask, what would have happened if we didn't do all this work? Oh, better microphone. So this is also a question to think about. So even the fact that we could get it all on the same level, it could be an achievement. I'm not happy with it, but it could be. Another thing is that what I remember from the Eurobarometer, that there's still a lot of difference between women and men participating in sport and physically activity. So not only talking about the difference between men and women, but what I wanted to say, not only talk about the difference between cities or countries or regions, what Michael was also telling about, but also think about certain target groups. So the context is not only where you live, but also who you are. And I think that policy is important to address that. And you wanted to know what we do in the Netherlands.
Please.
We have the National Sports Agreement since 4 years. And it's a collaboration, it's a coalition of the municipalities, of the National Olympic Committee, and the government. And now since a few months, also the commercial sport providers are on the at the table. So they joined. They joined the coalition, and this is very important, because when we talk about sport for all, we have to think about what is sport for all. Also, people being individually active or having a personal coach, for instance, doing sports or doing a boot camp, for instance, it's sport for all too. And this is growing. This is the part that you have to pay attention for. So that's why it's also important to have.
So what you're saying is that when Michael presented us the data, that when he was saying that most of the Europeans now are not included in a sports level organization, they are doing their activities elsewhere, mainly outdoor in the parks. So there is a challenge now related to how sports infrastructure and the sports system will adjust himself in order to go to that kind of population, which are at least the majority, what we are seeing at European level. That's saying that they are not looking for the classical sport infrastructures to make their activity.
And they're not looking for sport. Maybe we can call it sport for all, but we can also call it physical activity, and that is also the way to go for the Netherlands at the moment. So we're waiting for a new policy. It's all about having interdepartmental collaboration. So the infrastructure, social society, welfare, sports, economy, all working together to increase the level of physical activity. And it doesn't imply that you have to be a member of a club. This is also not what Tafiza is just looking for, more members.
So a sort of coalition with different types of stakeholders, including others to support the sports
and
sector.
other ministries than just the sport ministry.
Okay. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Paulo, can I just add to this?
Yes, of course.
These statistics were produced during the COVID.
You don't need, because you have a micro.
It's yours.
Sorry, I'll give it back. These numbers are lower than anticipated because of the COVID situation that we had the past 2 years. So we have to take into account the COVID restrictions and all the problems that came with COVID, which is why the numbers, even though most countries, if not all EU countries, are trying their best.
So, sorry, Dennis, just Arthur and Michael, can you hear well, Dennis, or can you hear well?
Yeah, it's okay for me.
Yeah?
It's open.
Just checking. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Can
Thank
I
you,
be heard?
Dennis.
Okay, hopefully.
Better.
Most countries, if not all, I believe all of the countries are doing their best to improve the sport activity within their national borders. But the COVID came, and the COVID had different effects. We were not able to play together. We had to limit the number of people indoors. Even in outdoors, there had to be some distances kept, which is why the results are lower than anticipated, even with all these funds that are being spent national-wise. Hopefully, but there's something new that was created. We have to reevaluate our sport programs. After the COVID restrictions, we have to see how to go to the next step. And I mean, with the next step, maybe we have to revise most of our programs to see and to improve grassroots participations, to create programs for mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, and probably family programs, which is something that we saw during the COVID, because we permitted them during the COVID to exercise together, to walk together, to bicycle together. So this is something new, at least in my country, Greece, that we are looking at, how to improve the family sport activity across Greece. So hopefully, next time we recalculate the numbers for the sport.
What you're saying is that we need to tailor the interventions
That we,
at local level in order to go more specifically to the offer
exactly.
and adjust to the different realities, right?
Exactly. Today we want to cater our sport activities to families. Like if in the sport field you have a playground for young children, maybe next to this field you can have for adults, being male or female, anyway, depending on the sport. But we saw that there is a demand for this, and people liked it. Like we had some so-called, not championships, but sport activities where mothers were playing against the daughters, or fathers against their sons in football, in handball, and they became very popular. Actually, there was a number of people that wanted to see these games because they were so interested. It was interesting to see how the mothers wanted to win because they were of a certain age. And then you had the daughters, the young ones always wanted to win as well. So these are new things that I think.
Michael had, I think he mentioned when he was speaking about where people do physical activity, and he said that in 5th place is sport club. The first is outdoor in parks, at home, on way to and from home, and then sports club. And he spoke about a little bit how can clubs adjust themselves to this new reality and to tailor solutions to this new reality. So what you are mentioning basically is adjusting two things: adjusting the offer in terms of services and adjusting the infrastructure or the possibility of the locals that the activities will be provided in order to tailor specific problems. But the question is, are these sport movement ready and with the capacity to change to this reality that you are mentioning? What do you think in Greece is the situation?
I think we are ready. The small-scale experiment has been done during the COVID period, and actually now what we're going to take it nationally. Like the small experiments when we had fathers and sons playing football or whatever other game, and mothers and daughters doing the same thing. We saw that there is a demand for this, and actually what we are going to promote in the following years is and we are going to propose this to the sport clubs. If they have an activity for children from, let's say, 8 to 10 or 10 to 12 in one part of the field, then in the other part of the field, the mothers and the fathers can play the same game, not something else, not that activity to, just to talk and sit down and watch their children. We will want them to play again. So we are going to ask the sport clubs if they have a program for young children, also to cater one for adults and probably for grandparents as well, if the sport permits. And in my country, this experiment is very popular. It became as a COVID effect, but it is popular, and we're going to pursue it in the following months.
So, Eva, you have an additional problem because your country is in a particular situation also in this actual moment with the influx of people coming from Ukraine. So you have an additional challenge, which is the people that are there already, and it is a large number of the population, as the public opinion knows. So basically, how you are dealing with all of these challenges along with this additional challenge, and what are the key message that you can bring us based on this information that Michael bring us in terms of the European Eurobarometer.
It's the first reaction after reading the results of the Eurobarometer is basically that the challenge to get society moving is even greater than ever before. So it's not something completely new. Partly I agree with what Denis said, that the COVID influenced the result of the Eurobarometer. But it's not only this reason to see the result, because we were seeing this trend already before COVID. So it's not that we have to make a new policy. We have to continue our efforts even with more money, more actions, more investment in the sport for all. So it's the Ministry of Sport and Tourism is one of the three main pillars of our activities is sport for all policy. And in the last 6-7 years, we were able to increase significantly the budget for the Sport for All projects. Next year, we will have more than 100 million euros only for Sport for All programs. And now we think the amount is significant, but now we have to tailor the offer to society, taking into account also the challenges you mentioned, the refugees coming, the energy crisis, and so on. So now there is a challenge to make the programs, make the projects attractive for the society, and to bring people more attracted to this Sport for All offer. And we still believe in sport clubs, and I know that the Eurobarometer, the results are not so optimistic, but we think that it's still worth to invest in sport clubs, and one of our main programs it's called Club, and it's to make direct grants for local sport clubs all over the Poland. And we have to also teach them how to adjust the offer to the new reality. So it's still worth to invest in sport clubs, but not leave them alone. We have to make sure that they know what the new challenges are, what's the new possibilities, what people expect from them. So as a governmental body, we see our role also in educating the sport leaders, local sport leaders, in that. And also in terms of the new challenges you mentioned with the Ukrainian living in Poland right now, and other economic and social challenges.
So this, in a sense, this data that coming from the Eurobarometer for you is crucial in order for you to keep on your local and national policies based on the information that they collected at the European level. So I think this connection, this growing partnership between this European level policy and then national and local policy is becoming to get stronger with this kind of information and this kind of fostering this partnership.
It's also important to remember that the Eurobarometer is an important survey, and it gives us a lot of information, but it's not the only survey we have, and it's not the answer for all the questions we have. And also we have to have our own national systems and statistics to understand better what we need at our national, local level. It's, you cannot find a solution for each and every country, as our speakers mentioned. There's a lot of difference between countries, so we need to remember that there's not everything in Eurobarometer is not all answers we will find there.
Thank you, Eva. Nicholas, in Cyprus, how can we overcome these challenges based on this information from the European level, and how can we translate these in national and local policies? It's on.
Well, the first glance of the Eurobarometer just showed that the results are very alarming in terms of involving more people, especially after the COVID effect, back into physical activity. So we had to transform our policies and transform our strategies, if you like, to try and attract back all the people, especially after the COVID ended. So from our part in Cyprus, with the Cyprus Sport Organization, we try to empower the Sport for All program and grassroots sports in collaboration with municipalities and in some aspect with the private sector. We try to involve some organizations from the private sector in order to combine them and make a coalition which can bring more to physical activity for the citizens. I will agree that another problem of the Eurobarometer is the gender equity. For me, it's very important that we create role models, okay? And we can build on that. We can offer some incentives to young girls and to involve them in, especially as we saw earlier today, as coaches or as judges.
That we are talking about during this morning.
Yeah. As I said before, we can, in terms of budget, we can bring in some organizations from the private sector in order to combine and to increase the funds and create a more accessible physical activity. And as we saw in the morning for the active cities, we have to transform and make all the infrastructures more accessible and perhaps more attractive to young people, because I noticed that all the barometer results are over the 15 years old. So the dropout age is about 12 years old. That's about the critical age from studies that show that all children engaging into sports are facing the dropout effect about 12 years old. So it's very important that we get some data before the age of 15. And as we said before, as you said, Eva, Eurobarometer is a great tool, but it's not the only tool. We should base our efforts on local and studies and data, and we can measure what are the needs of each country.
But On what you're saying, Nicolas, and to prepare the question for Jean-François, there is still, all of you mentioned this, the importance of aligning the national policy and the local in a tailored perspective due to these later times, COVID, this energetic crisis, this situation that we are having in Europe at the moment. But that, as you know, we have these two dimensions of the European policy that should be addressed. One is let's say, the short intervention that we need to do in the upcoming times based on this situation. But as you know, this post-COVID challenge bring the cohesion policy, bring the recovery and resilience programs at national level, and brought three dimensions that Michael, and in a way, after we will speak, when we speak a little bit after regarding the funds, three major, let's say, priorities that we need to incorporate in the Sports for All movement and in all policies, let's say, because Arthur was presenting a slide, sport in everywhere. So we presented something like this, a little bit like the health sector made in health in all policies. So probably we'll have to arrive to sport in all policies. That's another story. But it's the green transition and sustainability, which raise challenges in terms of offer, services, what are the impact of the sport itself, and what can the sport infrastructures also, with a special program that Michael, I think it was the last slide that Michael presented, was the new opportunity funds in this area, sustainability in infrastructures. Then the transition, the digital transition, which is also something relevant, and for us it was seen as a threat but could be an opportunity, as you know. And then what also Arthur mentioned in one slide, it was what he called the Europe close to citizens, so the proximity services to foster quality of life of citizens. So based on this, and based on the work that we have presented this morning, Jean-François, what is the challenges and how we are facing the challenges in terms of basically what we are talking about is capacity building and empower people to, at different levels, to deliver better policies and better just policies and services and programs for people. So how do you see the work that have been done with all this data in order to provide some insights for the upcoming months and years in terms of challenges?
Yeah, I think the Eurobarometer and the results which have been published a few weeks ago are only another sign of a trend and something which we have identified already many years ago, which comes to confirm what we could feel in the air, also with COVID-19, which has heightened some trends which we could follow. From my point of view, and what we can really see from a policy level, not only in Europe but everywhere around the world, is a discrepancy between people's needs, people's expectations, people's interest, and the policies which are put in the field of sport. And from our point of view, we really need to, in the future, change the paradigm. How are we managing in the future not to see a decrease of participation in sport, but not only in sport, in physical activity, but to increase it again? Too often nowadays, we are still focusing on the main question, how can we bring people to sport? But we saw in the Eurobarometer that people know what sport clubs are doing. They estimate that sport clubs are doing a good job. People know where they can go to do sports. The main question is, how can we bring physical activity to people? So it is about turning the trend, turning the way we are approaching policy in physical activity, and to make physical activity or sport not a choice, but part of the everyday lives. That once one steps out of its home, beyond the garden, one can go to walk, to cycle, take a bus, includes physical activity to go to one point, that one can find areas for leisure, that one can find active workplaces, active schools, and various active areas in their environment. But this requires a lot of work. We mentioned a little bit national policies, of course, and the importance to link with local policies, what you were saying, Paolo, and also the other panelists. I was also only half surprised when I read in the Eurobarometer that a lot of people do not consider so well what cities are doing. I was part of a project a few years ago, some of you might remember it. It was called PASS, Physical Activity Serving Society. And in the PASS project, a survey was made on policy all across Europe. And one of the striking results for me was that 66% of local decision makers do not know the figures of overweight and obesity. 2/3, and we know how much this is linked to physical activity, for example. So coming to capacity building, it means that we need to build capacity at national level, that we need to raise awareness as well, but also at local level, and across the spectrum of organizations which are working in the field of sport and physical activity, meaning public bodies, meaning NGOs, meaning the sport system, etc., etc. Also, companies will have more and more overall to play in the future. And maybe I will now put my feet in the hornet's nest, but I like to ask the question whether in future, should we have only policies for sport, or shouldn't we have a policy for sport and a policy of physical activity? Because we are talking about two very different things. The sport system works extremely well. It is very important indeed that we continue supporting it, that it grows, that we adapt the offer so that we can attract more women, more seniors, which not always find a possibility, avoid youth dropout, but we focus on the field of physical activity as well, which is a much broader approach, and as we saw in the Eurobarometer, can attract more people to physical activity.
Of course, Eva, please.
When we see the main barrier of the lack of activity is the lack of time. And that is something that we need to also figure out how to give people more time to be physically active. And it means for me that the sport policy is not separated from the other policies like modern labor market policy, like the national health policy, and so on. We knew it before. It's not something completely new, but now we see the data that it's the main barrier in most of the countries, also in Poland. So the work-life balance, it's not only the catchphrase. It's something that we need to find out how to help people to reach that. And the lack of time, it's a difficult barrier. I mean, when we say about the lack of motivation, it's a little bit more easy for us as a policymaker to show people why it's important, and so on and so on. When we are talking about lack of time, it's a complex of problems that are influencing this barrier. So it's really difficult, and I think it's important now to not have the separate sport policy. It's to have the sport policy, complete, comprehensive, inter-sectoral policy.
So, Jacqueline, just a
just
moment,
one.
because tell me.
And also put your money where your mouth is in this case, because when you look at the funding, for instance, in the Netherlands, most of the funding of municipalities goes to sport accommodation of clubs. And then we have to look for how can we really increase physical activity. Then you really have to balance where you put your money.
That's the question. So we know that Arthur has to leave in some few moments. So Arthur, based on this last intervention from put the money on your mouth, more or less, where you put your mouth on your mouth. Arthur, from all of these challenges that you put when you were presenting this active development concept and what we need to develop in terms of the 10 steps that you identified, the 10 steps to provide support for active development to unlock, that was the word that you used in in your slide. So unlock, he says that they are locked, and if the sport movement, if he wants money, he needs to go there and to unlock the money to itself. So based on all of these big picture that you presented, and it's very huge picture and very different types of programs and groups of funding. You mentioned basically the policy cohesion funds as the most probable opportunities to get access to those funds. So in your opinion, Arthur, what are the key messages that should be sent out at this moment to the sports sector, not only at national level, but also at the local level, in order to prepare ourselves to this challenge, which is unlock these funds based on this active development concept that you provide us?
Hey, that's an easy one. Thanks, Paulo.
It is.
In 2 minutes. No, just kidding here. I think I'm hearing already from the panel also a lot of very good and very relevant points as well. I think already there is a shift in the narrative here, which is that we are not talking about sport organizations, but also talking about sport programs, how to get people more active, how to sort of work with public spaces, how to sort of, I'm hearing lots of things which are sort of going beyond the scope of a sport organization itself. So, and I think all of that is really the key here to unlock at this cohesion policy funds. And I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it's the only way, let's be clear about that. But if we go down that route, then what we need to do is exactly that, is to take up a sort of an important public facing role. And by sort of developing activities which are, yes, getting people more active, physically active or more active in sport, by developing programs that are combining, let's say, an intervention in the public space, and therefore developing partnerships with local authorities, with associations which are sort of also developing other types of projects, so mixed projects involving sport, physical activity, and perhaps culture, or perhaps something else, is really a key to become part not of the sport movement, not only of the sport movement, but simply part of the city life, part of the regional life. And if you take that approach, then you're very close to developing the right projects for to sort of tap into cohesion policy funds. It's not that simple, it's more complex than that. It requires dialogue with regional managing authorities. But if we are looking at developing that kind of perspectives, then we are getting much closer to let's say, properly integrating, having sport and physical activity properly integrated in cohesion funds.
Just want to hear the reaction of Dennis on this information that you are saying about the funds and what your perspective related to the funds at European level, to the national level, how you are planning to harmonize this challenge. Dennis.
It works both ways. First of all, we're going to use the Eurobarometer statistics to advance our policies. That's step number one. We are going to indicate what went wrong, what is slowing down the organization, and how to step up the procedures. That's the first thing. The second thing is we're going to take into account all these problems that we have accumulated in the ministry, collecting ideas from other organizations and mainly federations and municipalities to address this problem. We want families to be more active. We want families to be more active now more than ever. And the obesity situation, which was not mentioned, I was surprised. We have more people overweight and obese than any other given time in history in Greece. And I think this is more or less the same situation in other countries as well. Sedentary living, ordering more often than we should, having food delivered to our homes. These are situations that we cannot fight, but we can offer an alternative. And the alternative is more activity, more sports, more variety of sports. So we are going to emphasize as well in the near future policies to offer a variety of sports and not only one sport, because people are interested in variety of sports. You know, all the family members do not like a sport. Maybe they like some other second, third option. So this is what we're going to do after all these statistics that are being said.
Thank you, Dennis. And I know
Thank you.
Also you have to leave. Arthur has to leave also. So before you go, Arthur, just a final question, because you mentioned 3 points, and as I recall it, when you were talking about the entry points of sport to this access to the funds. And you mentioned 3 top questions that should be looked at, which is the basis of the cooperation team that we put in our program. First is delivery long-term partnerships. Second, set up training and workshop to structure the diversity in sport movement. And third, create sport incubators and clusters with social inclusion problems. So based on these 3 topics that you put it as entry point, what do you think that should be done in order to adjust what are the needs to unlock those structural funds, and how can clubs and grassroots organization at local level, based on this partnership that also Jacqueline was mentioning in a more coalition perspective approach, in order to go there and in fact do great projects, fostering active development, social development, economical development through sport, and in this case to unlock this potential that is there. So what is your opinion that what we should do and what we should foster in the upcoming times on this regard?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paolo. I'll try to answer that quite quickly, but in the right way. I think I would say 2 things here. The first thing is sort of playing collectively. Well, okay, that works well for sports, but playing collectively within your own, let's say, movement. So I think, for example, what you're doing, in fact, in this project and in the, let's say, movement that Tafiza represents, for instance, that's already an important first step. And finding the right declinations in different, let's say, contexts would be an important first step. It might be working with some intermediary organizations. For example, in previous webinar, we were working on Organized by Share. We were working with organizations involved in connecting, let's say, youth funding opportunities with local stakeholders. That's typically the type of a partnership you need to develop. But second, also developing the sort of collective force. Sorry?
Resume, don't go alone, go together and get a strong partnership to get the support to unlock, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that partnership can be built from within, kind of thing, within the sport for movement at first, and then it gives you stuff more.
But as you know,
let's say bargaining power to go to
but
the
as
next.
You know, many times, unfortunately, local organizations are still a bit isolated and doing their own job, and they are very difficult. They have a lot of difficulty in finding partnerships at local level and sometimes at national level to get this coalition, that these partnerships more stronger. So, what would you be your advice in order to foster these strongest partnerships?
Yeah, it's very context dependent, depending on who's out there in your, let's say, own city or even neighborhood, and also your own nations. Because if you're doing social inclusion programs, then the whole social inclusion area becomes your natural partner, and that's perhaps where you should be looking at partnership development. If you're only doing sport itself, you might be working with other, let's say, small clubs, etc., but build the stuff small coalition there. But the whole coalition building is kind of context dependent and mission dependent, I would say. So I cannot really say too much on that, but one tip would be to sort of gradually sort of widen your circle. And that can be done quite naturally then in that way, because it might be, instead of, let's say, simply working on this, jointly working with another organization on an event, you might do more structural partnerships by organizing regular meetings, regular sport events throughout the year. So it might be that. And then by working together, you will develop also some sort of common interest representation as well. But what I want to get to as well is that your natural interlocutor in many cases should be your local authorities, so the city or the region or perhaps the neighborhood, let's say, municipal organizations. So depending on, again, your context, in some countries you have, like, let's say, district or based organizations. So depending on where you are, what the setup is, it will be different, but the sort of relationship with public authorities, trusted relationship, then understanding that you can deliver something beyond sport is crucial if you want to ensure this sort of mutual trust and long-term partnerships and evolve in this sphere of public policy objectives that I discussed earlier.
And Arthur, final question. You said set up training and workshop. What are shared initiatives tending or planning to provide on this area for people that are listening to us to pay attention and to look for it?
Yeah,
I know that you are preparing
plans.
something, so that's why I'm putting the question.
Yeah, we are doing a few things on that. So we are doing capacity building. So we have issued a call that concluded in September, and we are sending information to applicants very soon. So we'll launch a sort of series of workshops with local organizations a bit everywhere in Europe. So we are planning several capacity building missions to help organizations in finding their ways around, let's say, all these cohesion policy funds, and helping them to develop the right approach, really. That's one thing. We're also doing, that's limited, of course, to selected organizations, but we're also doing webinars. We have done a few of them back in earlier this year, and we'll do probably more early next year, where we really try also to sort of support organizations and really go through all the steps that we have, that I've mentioned, and really take the time to find the right strategies to access all of that. So that's a bit what we do in Share. I encourage you to sign up for in the newsletter. We publish regular newsletter on our activities as well. So if you want more information, Paolo, you can share my details, and I will be happy to onboard new organizations as well into this adventure.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you so much for your attention. For sure, people will take a look on the Share initiative and what you are planning, and all of you, and all of us, because some of us have been working also on the initiative, and for sure, a lot of work ahead to be done. Thank you, Arthur, for your participation, and having the rest of a good day in Brussels. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Take
Have
care.
a great
Bye-bye.
end of conference.
Take care. Bye-bye. Michael, you still there? And after we spoke about some fundings at the Share initiative, which will be unlocked. What are the already unlocked funds, and what are the priorities that at this level in order to create these necessary partnerships and capacity building? You mentioned this new approach that is going to be launched by the Commission in the learning mobility. How do you think that this could be also important at this level, fostering capacity building, fostering exchange of knowledge, and how can countries at the national and local level and local organizations benefit in this complex funding, complex environment that we are living in? How can we look for a positive approach from the Commission side with this great sign that you are giving?
Thank you for the question, Paulo. And first of all, thank you for the panelists also for the very interesting interventions and questions and remarks. I have taken note of a lot of things that they've said on which I would love to comment, but I won't. I'll retain from that. Yeah, but I'll maybe
You can also
maybe I'll
comment
first
those.
I'll
You can
first
also
answer
comment those.
I'll first answer your question maybe. The mobility, the learning mobility program is in say a continuation of our tradition of creation of networking and of exchanging of good practices. The learning mobility, of course, will focus on several elements. And as I've mentioned in the presentation, it's going to be about coaches, trainers, but definitely also managers. So I see opportunities in that field where that's managers of sport athletes, sport clubs, could also step into a learning mobility program, whereby, for example, everything related to funding of federations, funding of clubs, could be an element that would be presented as a proposal. Of course, as you know, and as everybody knows, these Erasmus proposals that come out will have to be evaluated. So I expect that some of them will be accepted. As Arthur said, there's a hit rate of 40%. So the chances are quite high if there are some of those related to funding and potential exchanges of good practices on how to unlock the EU funds. I do think that those have quite some chance of being accepted. So that's, say, my answer to your specific question. I don't know if that's in line with what you expected. I can't, of course, promise you that there will be a lot of these kind of exchanges, because there you will still have to evaluate the incoming proposals. But I do see some potential and some possible positive outcomes in that context.
What you're saying is that is one more opportunity for people, along with the existing opportunities, the small collaborative, the collaborative, and the capacity building. Calls, let's say, one more opportunity for people to foster the partnership and collaboration, in this case in a bilateral perspective, because this learning mobility will be between only two countries each time, right? So it's a bilateral program, right?
I'm not that familiar with the details of the program. I have colleagues who are working on that, and I think it's more than bilateral. I think that you have multiple countries that are involved in the learning mobility. I think it was at least 3, if I recall well. So in that sense, it is definitely about really exchanging good practices and helping one another forward. So I wouldn't dare to go into too much details on that, because I'm not following it as detailed as that. So, but I'm almost sure that it's like at least 3 countries that need to be involved in it.
Okay. So I think that Jacqueline wants to react on something that you said. So let's try to eating up a little bit the things here. So Jacqueline, please.
Yeah, because always I'm interested in new possibilities within Erasmus. But thinking about the situation where we are in now, with sport clubs really struggling with energy costs, inflation, people don't want to pay their contribution anymore because they have also a tight budget. Or also hearing about at Erasmus Plus Youth that people really have are struggling with travel costs, hotel costs, etc., that it's not sufficient anymore. So I was wondering, is this the right time now for the learning mobility? Because it's a wonderful idea, but will it work in this situation? Is this the priority for sport clubs to send out coaches? And are they able to do it because they have to fund, I think, co-fund themselves? So that was my question, just to be on the realistic side for now.
So you're meaning in a short-term perspective, based on this
on the crisis
situation
now.
that we have, if it's going to be something that will be very well received by the local organizations.
Now,
What do you think about that, Michael? We'll see.
I think it's a very genuine question and remark also. On the other hand, you know as well as I do that setting up programs like this and developing programs like this isn't done in time span of a few weeks. So colleagues have prepared this since the beginning of this year. I think they started January, February working on that, having multiple meetings with potential stakeholders who are involved in this. And unfortunately, of course, we had the invasion of Ukraine that came in February, with all the consequences following from that. And indeed, this will be an element that we will have to take on board and that we will have to consider once we launch the new program. But I'm confident that there is enough flexibility also in the field and in the context of the program to see to what extent that we would not be able to deliver the objectives of the program. So, and I'm sure that without any doubt, there will be potential candidates who will not be able to profit from it at the start. On the other hand, this is a start, as I've said. Remember what we've had in 2009 and where we are now in terms of, for example, funds within the Erasmus Plus project. We started with a very modest budget with even pilot projects, preparatory actions before there was even Erasmus Plus funds. And now we're 15 years later and we are talking about 500 million over a period of seven years. So we are starting now, I think the initial budget now is 8 million that is foreseen for the first year now. But it might grow. I mean, look where we are after 35 years of Erasmus Plus exchange of students. I'm quite confident that following this first year, very quickly, this program will be picked up. And I think the added value of the program will very quickly be clear for everybody, which probably, and I'm almost certain that, don't come back to me on that within a few years, but I'm almost sure that this program will be picked up and that there will be additional funds for this program to grow and grow. So I believe that as the other programs have grown over the years, that this program will also increase in importance and that the budget will also increase. And indeed, there will definitely be interested parties who will not have the possibilities to step into the program. That will be clearly evaluated also. I mean, that's the way we work. We have the launch of the program. We will set up. We will see how it works. It will be evaluated and it will be adjusted in due time. So yeah,
we'll see. So before we are coming to our time, to the end of our time. We have also already Malgorzata ready for the final presentation. But I think it is important to have a last roundtable also with you, Michael, in the end. Roundtable about two issues that are connected with all of this and we didn't speak too much time until now. It's cooperation and monitoring related with funding. So what are the challenges in your country, specifically on this side? So fostering partnerships to enlarge the strength of opportunities, and of course how we are going to measure the future impact of what we are doing and to adjust the policies and at least trying to change a bit the reality of the numbers of the last decade. And with this, how we are going to try to get more execution from the funds, from the European and national funds that are available. Jacqueline, the Netherlands.
Yeah, I would like to concentrate on the EU funds just to keep it a bit shorter. We really try to invest in getting more people in the Netherlands activated for the European funding. So now new is that we make an e-book, an online publication about only Erasmus Plus sports with really how to, so easy as possible. And we also start with a website, Sport in Europe, also showing what you can do in the Horizon Europe, for instance, but also bringing the news about new calls, etc. So have one central website within our website of the Knowledge Center where people can find the information out about EU funding. And of course, now we have this online publications and website, we can better monitor who is visiting this website, who is asking for extra information, and this is also what we can use for our yearly inspiration meeting about Erasmus Plus sport. It's difficult. For instance, for last year, I saw that a lot of Dutch projects for not-for-profit events, so the bigger ones, they got their grant, but there were not many from small partnerships, etc. So it's really sometimes very much guessing what we do well and what we do not do well in the communication. And I think that's a cooperation between the European Commission, what SHARE can do, what we can do as SHARE partners, and what you do in the Netherlands. So for instance, we have a cooperation with the NOC, NSF, the Olympic Committee. We have a cooperation with the municipalities and the government, and we try to do it as best as possible. Also Sport Innovate, I should also mention. So the sport innovation and the sustainable sports sector, we work together to get more information to the Dutch sports sector about EU funding.
Thank you. Eva, in Poland.
Already preparing for the new Erasmus Plus opportunities and the mobility in Erasmus Plus sport. So we are really looking forward to this action. And this, for us, it is important to show the sport organization the possibilities that are existing. And we spend a lot of time and effort to educate, to help, to support the Polish sport organization, also the local NGOs and the local organization to use the opportunities in the EU funds possible for sport. And already from 2017, every year we organize the annual conference on the different possibilities for EU funding for sport. And each year we are having a greater interest from the sport movement. So we are quite optimistic that it is something that the sport movement in Poland expect and looking forward for this. We also organize workshops for them, how to apply for grants, how to make the partnerships. They need a lot of support, but they are doing better and better every year. And also for us, it is a great opportunity for dialogue with them. So when we are organizing the workshop, we are in direct contact with the sport leaders, and we know what the most challenges for them, what's the barriers for them, and so on. So we can also react on that. So in terms of monitoring, it's important to have ongoing dialogue, to be in touch with your national sport movement, to know what's going on there, what's the problems, what's the expectations. So that's what we are doing. We will see how it goes with the mobility, and nobody knows yet. It's very true what you said, and new challenges are coming, and also the sport movement will have to compete for the resources, and also the governmental institution will not be able to increase budget always, so we will have to compete with other sectors as well. So our offer has to be budget-wise and really, really well thought.
So optimistic message to take home.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eva. Nicholas, please, Cyprus.
In my country, in Cyprus, now we're trying to create collaborations between the government, the local authorities, and the private sector, as I said before. That is collaborations in order to know what their weaknesses are in terms of infrastructure or other programs of physical activity, and to transfer the knowledge and all that comes with it, and in order to create coalitions strong enough to get the funding they really need for the creation of those programs. In terms of budget, we are trying to increase the budget for Sport for All and grassroots sports through the public sector, which is the Cyprus Sport Organization, and bringing into the picture some private organizations strong enough that they are trying to promote that as a give and take action, to promote their actions, but they will invest in physical activity, in getting more people into physical activity.
Message to take home. Jean-François, what are the challenges and what are the next steps? You have also presented here the platform, the capacity building platform came out from the project. So based on all this environment and all these at least optimistic perspectives that you have listened here, what are the next steps?
I will not take the next steps from the Tafiza perspective, but I like to look broader at the sport for all and the grassroots sports movement. There is one topic which I believe we have not tackled yet in this panel, which is very much linked to monitoring and funding as well. This is how are we measuring, how are we making the case for sport for all, for grassroots sports to be funded. And there is one area which has been overseen in the past year. It's starting to come more, but I would believe there is a case to really invest more from countries, from the European Union, is about measuring the social impact of sport. A lot of work has been done in the last years in measuring the economic impact, which is very much linked to elite sports, finding out what are the results of sports events. But we were mentioning earlier today, volunteering. What's the value of all of the millions or billions of hours that volunteers are putting together? What's the value of a program for social inclusion of refugees? What's the value for society of a gender equity program? We do not know yet how to measure this. There are some models which are coming, but making the case from a general perspective and providing the tools for projects, for organizations as part of Erasmus to be able to measure this, to make the case, would be something which is, from my point of view, very interesting. And to bounce on this, and this is also something which we are always looking at, there are a lot of successful Erasmus Plus projects out there. And if we provide them the tools to evaluate and really show the impact of them, how can we make, or how can we achieve the result that those projects are sustained and that after 2 or 3 years they are not over, but they have the means either through national funding or again through EU to continue on a more sustainable basis as well.
Return on social investment of the project. Jacqueline, can you want to react?
I would like to add.
We are stressed with time, but
in the Netherlands we have this SROI, so the social return on investment, and it's estimated that the societal impact of investing in sports and physical activity is 2.7 to every invested euro. And it depends whether you're in this municipality or the other, so it can change from 1.8 to 3.5, and every municipality in the Netherlands can ask the Knowledge Center for Sport and Physical Activity, here are our data, here are our base indicators, and we put in everything in the model, and then you can say this is the estimated societal impact. And I know last Friday I saw also a presentation of UEFA, and they are also in this kind of model to invest all the base indicators of local soccer clubs, but also already other sports in a system, also SROI, because they know this is very important to show that sports for all is not just something you take for granted. It's really a big part of society, but we don't, you are completely right, we don't show enough.
Nicolas, quick reaction because we need to finish this panel.
Just a comment. If you can create positive impressions in every participant in physical activity, I believe that participant will come and support. It means whether it's monetary or whatever, that physical activity. I think that is the key to give positive impressions about the participation in physical activity.
Michael, just a final take-home message. We have discussed a lot of issues, a lot of information here to discuss. It would be 2 days in a room discussing all of these points, but some 2 or 3 take-home message, hopefully optimistic from your side for us and for the sports movement in a sports for all and grassroots perspective.
I would mention 3 things. First, and I keep it very short. First, the element that Arthur mentions in terms of teaming up and partnerships is crucial and very important. And that is what he mentioned also with the stepping stones, that Erasmus needs to be seen as a sort of first step, and then the small projects in the first stepping in and learning how to work with partnerships, and then moving upwards towards the more bigger, I sometimes call them pots of gold, where you have the structural funds, the cohesion funds, where there are a lot of possibilities, but which needs also a very professional approach in terms of how do you approach it and how do you get the funds out of it. So definitely important, the partnerships that you build up, that's important. And the long-term approach also, very important to take on. Something that was mentioned earlier, that's my second element, second point I want to make. Dennis, who in the meantime left, he mentioned that during the presentation there was no mention whatsoever about obesity and about the overweight pandemic that is coming our way. A very valid point, but unfortunately I didn't have the time to cover all these things. And of course, that is one of the elements that we are also much interested in and working on through our Healthy Lifestyle for All campaign. But next to that, also in our cooperation with WHO and everything related to the HEPA work. So for sure, it's not because it wasn't mentioned and it wasn't part of the Eurobarometer that it is not something that is on our radar. So that is definitely also an element where Sport for All, of course, plays a crucial role. The whole movement of Sport for All is there, of course, extremely important. And then the third point I wanted to make is in conclusion that, and that's a little bit putting the ball back into the play art of you and of people working more in member states. I attended a number of information sessions over the last couple of months, especially with the new action plans in the member states. And I was struck by the absence of sport and physical activity stakeholders in these info sessions. What I want to say with that is that there's also some responsibility of following up what is happening within the member states and within the regions related to, for example, Interreg. So it was all information sessions about Interreg, regional development. So our stakeholders need to also invest time and energy in following up what is happening in the regions with their managing authorities and get a foot in the door with the managing authorities. So I know that in certain regions it is done very actively. I know that you are, for example, in Portugal, working very actively on that. But in other certain regions, that isn't the case at all. So that's definitely also a working point whereby each stakeholder that is involved also picks up their responsibility and goes the extra mile also to make sure that sport and physical activity is always on the agenda when discussions are taking place about regional developments, innovation, and all these elements that are of crucial elements. So I do believe, and this is a warm call also to all stakeholders following, that we need to also come into connection with your local and regional authorities and make sure that sport remains on the agenda and that physical activity remains on the agenda. I'll stop here because I could continue. I should be in Lisbon because I think we should be here. We could discuss all night long. But I'll stop here. But for sure, this isn't the end of my story. I mean, there's a lot more that I would like to say, but unfortunately, we can't do it here. But these 3 main points were things that I would like to share with you and that I hope you can take with you in your continued work. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. For sure, from our side, we will create that opportunity, as you can imagine, and there will be, for sure, opportunity for you to come in person in Lisbon to share your views and your knowledge. So, first of all, I would like to thank to everybody, also Arthur and you, Michael, for your time. Hope it's not raining in Brussels. Here, also not raining in Lisbon. So the forecast is is making us a mistake. So Jacqueline, Eva, Dennis, it's not here anymore, and Nicolas, and of course Jean-François. Thank you for your contribution. I think a lot of has been said. A lot of things should be done and should be also discussed. We will have another conference, I think, on 15th of November. Malgorzata will speak a little bit in a while about this, but we are already late in time, so let's invite Malgorzata. Thank you all. Congratulations. And thank you, Michael. And we are going to invite Malgorzata Rona from the Tafiza Europe co-chair to present the Tafiza Europe activities. We are a little bit away of time, so we are asking you, your synthesis capacity.
Inserido na celebração da 8ª edição da Semana Europeia do Desporto e considerando que este ano celebramos o Ano Europeu da Juventude, o Instituto Português do Desporto e Juventude desafiou os jovens a participar na iniciativa Youth Sport Labs, inspirados nos Youth Labs da Comissão Europeia. Estes decorreram em cada uma das 5 regiões continentais e nos 2 arquipélagos, no dia 23 de setembro, primeiro dia da Semana Europeia do Desporto 2022. O Youth Sport Labs pretendeu reunir grupos de jovens de diferentes contextos sociais para debater temas relevantes para o setor desportivo com impacto.
Working together for many years, and we are working together with all different projects, and we will meet soon because we are also all of us as a partner of the project. We are also members of Tafiza. And as the panel finished quite optimistically, I also would like to finish today with some optimist message also for our online participants. I will finish my presentation with showing you some opportunities to start cooperating with us and also to participate in the next Tafiza meetings that will come, that will be organized in Europe within next months. Yeah, so to start, for those who are not aware, Tafiza is one of the leading international sport for all organizations. It was launched more than 30 years ago, and it's also recognized by the very important world leaders as IOC, UNESCO, WHO. And what is Tafiza doing? It's a very long list of the initiatives and tasks and cooperation programs, but I will just mention the flagship ones, which is the World Sport for All Games that take place every 4 years. Unfortunately, the last one in Lisbon, planned in 2021, could take part only in a remote form, but hopefully the COVID will not come back so strong, and next one will be in a physical way. Every 2 years, Tafiza organizes the World Congresses. The last one was also postponed due to COVID, and it took place also last year in Portorož in Slovenia, and every year Tafiza is organizing World Walking Day, which is the first weekend of October, so it was just a few days ago. Tafiza is a world organization. It has almost 400 members in almost all the countries in the world, and it's a very inclusive one. It has members from national sport federations, from international sport federations, from Olympic committees, from ministries, but also from the local municipalities and education and knowledge institutes. So it's a really big group of organizations, of institutions that has an interest in sport for all, and this makes the organization very special. Okay, I will also mention that Tafiza has regional bodies. One of the bodies is Tafiza Europe, and today, because we are in Europe and we want to invite you to cooperate with Tafiza Europe here, I will focus more on Tafiza Europe activities. Tafiza Europe was launched 20 years later than Tafiza in 2011 in Turkey, and totally we have over 130 members. There are national members and also associated members. Tafiza has official guidelines, which are the guidelines on how do we work, how we cooperate with members and with each other, and how the steering committee is elected every 4 years. So 3 years ago, we had elections in Tafiza Europe during the World Congress in Tokyo in 2019, and this is the composition of the steering committee for today. We have 2 co-chairs, Patrick Peroza, who was with us in the morning, and myself, and we have also 6 members. What we do as a steering committee, we organize and we chair the Tafiza Europe members meeting that are taking place at least every 2 years, prior to the General Assembly of Tafiza during the congresses. And the last meeting took place in Slovenia in Portorož, and the next one will take in Düsseldorf next year, and it will be a very important one because we'll also have the elections for steering committee there. And just what is on the agenda of our meetings, we talk about various things. We of course talking about the working plans. We are talking about communication tools that we are implementing. We are also talking about the European possibilities, like the European project. We are always presenting what is the EU offering for us. And the elections for the steering committee is also a very important point of our agenda every 2 years. So what we've managed to achieve in Europe so far, we managed to have the regional Tafiza key elements. So we have Tafiza Europe conferences every 2 years. The first one was in Ljubljana, then we were happy to have one in Netherlands, in Heerenveen, and the last one was in Perugia only a few weeks ago when we were talking about the challenges for traditional sport and games. Also at the university basis, what are the challenges for the scientific basis of sport, traditional sport and games. We also managed to have 2 Tafiza European Games, the first one in 2018 in Netherlands, and the second were in Perugia, connected with the conference a few weeks ago. So the products, the conferences, and the games are the key elements that we are working on, but in the meantime, we are also strongly cooperating with the EU, as we are European-based. Tafiza was involved in several initiatives of the European Commission. One of the first was the creation of the guidelines for European Week of Sport. Before it started in 2015, we had to prepare some documents, and Tafiza was invited also to give some advices. Tafiza is also presented at the sport forums as a panelist in the discussion panels and as the participants. And also Tafiza answered to one of the new initiatives of European Commission, which is the Healthy Lifestyle for All, by signing a pledge during the last EU forum in Lille this year. Also, the commissioners are very much involved in cooperation with Tafiza, so we were very happy to award them with the most important Tafiza award, the Younger Palm Award, and the awardees were Andrula Vasiliou from Cyprus and then Tibor Navracic, who was the commissioner from Hungary. So as I said before, Tafiza, based in Europe, it gives us a lot of opportunities to cooperate in Europe, and also the European Commission and the EU money is giving us some support in this cooperation. So far, Tafiza was a leader or member of 18 projects, and I know that more projects are coming that will just start next year. And exactly this project, while we are here, is also one of those projects supported from the EU money. The projects are very different, has very different focuses, very different priorities. During the projects, we talk about the city settings, about traditional sports, about anti-doping in recreational sport, also how to organize the environmental friendly sport events, what is one of the priorities for the EU right now. Yes, to finish optimistically, I would like to tell you that, of course, Tafiza Europe is planning new activities, is planning next Tafiza Europe conference in 2 years. We are also planning next games in 4 years in 2026. Now the calls is about to open, so anyone who would host Tafiza conference on Tafiza Europe games are more than welcome to contact Tafiza and discuss the possibility. And also next year we have the Tafiza World Congress, which will be based in Düsseldorf in Europe. So it's also a great opportunity to come over and to learn more what Tafiza is doing and participate in very interesting presentations and panels. The main theme of the Congress will be more together than ever, so please make sure that everyone will be there. Thank you very much, and you're welcome to cooperate with Tafiza and Tafiza Europe. Thank you.
Yes, I think it has now, the time has now come to close our day. Thank you very much to all of those in the room. Thank you very much to all of you who have joined online remotely and who will also watch this video or this conference in the future. On behalf of Tafiza Europe, but also the European Action Partners, we very much thank you and look forward to future collaborations and implementing together the outputs that the European Action Project has created over the past 3 years. Wish you all the best and to have a good evening.
Inserido na celebração da 8ª edição da Semana Europeia do Desporto, e considerando que este ano celebramos o Ano Europeu da Juventude, o Instituto Português do Desporto e Juventude desafiou os jovens a participar na iniciativa Youth Sport Labs, inspirados nos Youth Labs da Comissão Europeia. Estes decorreram em cada uma das 5 regiões continentais e nos 2 arquipélagos, no dia 23 de setembro, primeiro dia da Semana Europeia do Desporto 2022. O Youth Sport Labs pretendeu reunir grupos de jovens de diferentes contextos sociais para debater temas relevantes para o setor desportivo com impacto social. Procurou encontrar uma matriz de entendimento sobre os temas selecionados, identificando conclusões para cada tema a debater com especialistas no 3º Fórum Nacional do Desporto para Todos, que aconteceu no dia 30 de setembro no encerramento da Semana Europeia do Desporto. Assim, foi debatida a área de desporto na natureza e sustentabilidade ambiental, nomeadamente o papel do desporto na conservação da natureza através de ações de voluntariado juvenil e a área de juventude e desporto, escola, universidade e fitness, destacando a prática de desporto nos seus vários aspectos. Estás pronto para participar na mudança? Contamos contigo na próxima edição.